Thanks, Liam. I'd like to thank Liam and Catherine for all they've done to organize this conference. It's good to see so many old and dear friends. Ireland's kind of a second home. My family was here on the Mary Ball, Washington a decade ago, and we return 2 or 3 times every year because the green mist has fallen all over us. My scholarship tends to be policy relevant work, and I'm kind of a nuts and bolts person. So we're going to move from 2 people who are very, very versed in theory to get down into the weeds of how things are actually done in DC or not done. And that's sort of the theme, I think, of Trump's first 100 days in foreign policy. I'm going to focus on 2 main areas, policy and process. And in both, I think this administration is setting record lows for implementation. Several early mistakes that ensured the U.S. foreign policy process would be flawed. So I'm going to focus first on process. This was, without a doubt, the worst transition probably in the history of the Republic as far as foreign affairs. Usually a transition team works almost as a shadow government during the transition period. None of that happened. People at state in the National Security Council kept waiting for Trump's people to show up in transition meetings. They never happened at all. There was not one single meeting that took place between election and inauguration. There wasn't one single transfer of knowledge. There were no papers passed. This was just a really horrible, horrible mistake. Professionals at state and NSC were marginalized very early in the process. To this day, most people who are lifers inside state and NSC really don't have a clear direction of where the policy is going, or even, ironically, if they have a job. All U.S. ambassadors were forced to resign. Now, this is usually the case with the political appointments. You resign and then you're allowed to stay on, usually trying to take family considerations into place. This isn't what happened. All ambassadors resigned. A few have stayed in place because they've never been recalled, even though they've been forced to resign, and there's no one in the pipeline. This is just, as you can see, this is a train wreck happening. 200 assistant secretary positions in the State Department remained unfilled. All of these require Senate confirmation. The confirmation process should be months and months of careful vetting. There is no one in the pipeline. As you can imagine, it's at this level that the work actually gets done. The policy planning staff is the reflective thinking part of the State Department. It is gutted. There are no people in that office. So this is probably of all the process problems, this is the most significant. The assistant, for those of you who don't know the U.S. system very well, the assistant secretaries and the undersecretaries are the people who head the area desks. The State Department is divided geographically, and without their direction, their staffs can't produce policy papers, can't move forward on policy initiatives. So it's really ground to a halt what the State Department is doing. There are still 2,300 jobs unfilled at the State Department. This is partly ideological. Steve Bannon and Donald Trump believe that the deep state must be dismantled. They really don't understand, I think, what that means. These 2,300 jobs are somewhat essential for the U.S. to fulfill its obligations. I should also say that under Hillary Clinton, the State Department, when it retracted its footprint after the Iraq War, it had expanded its portfolio a bit to include some general security operations in Iraq. For instance, after 2010, most people are flying around in Iraq on State Department funded flights. So there was a bit of an expansion under Secretary Clinton, but not as much as was needed. The budgets were woefully short in the State Department, and what's happened since then, of course, is there's a call for a 30% cut. So this would be the least funded State Department probably in the history of the Republic. Secretary of State Tillerson shares with his boss not only a lack of knowledge of kind of basic foreign policy issues, but also, and this will be a theme I'll repeat this morning, a lack of kind of professionalism. Tillerson is already famous for missing appointments, important appointments. For instance, April 17th, he had an office appointment set up with the head of the African Union, Musi Faki, and he just didn't show up. And this is becoming the norm in Foggy Bottom. Tillerson is now, as you've probably seen in the papers, he's on a listening tour of Foggy Bottom, not with the intent of learning anything about foreign policy, but rather with an eye toward more cuts. Right? The budget cuts are right now aimed at about 33%. And the idea that seems to be circulating in Washington today is we've gone 100 days, the world hasn't fallen apart, there's nobody employed, this can't be a bad thing. Actually, it's a horrible thing. What I want to do for the next couple of minutes is tell you where those cuts are scheduled to come, to give you a sense that at the highest levels of the administration, they have no idea where these, when they cut, they say, oh, everybody's going to cut 10%. They don't really know what that means on the ground. So I want to be very specific about some of these cuts. For example, the proposed budget cuts would cut out almost all U.S. aid to the entire sub-Saharan African region. With the first line item on USAID in this region is training Nigerian doctors how to deal more efficiently and effectively with Ebola. That's gone. Any transitional justice program that the State Department has been running in the Central African Republic or the Democratic Republic of Congo, or even still in Rwanda, which was a favorite of the Clinton administration, that's gone. Landmine clearing in Vietnam, that's gone. Almost anything to do with soft power. And this is something that I think the Trump administration doesn't understand at all in formulating a comprehensive foreign policy, is that one of the U.S. best assets is its soft power assets. And they don't know how to manage it, they don't know how to measure it, and they don't want to fund it. And these are all horrible, in my view, horrible positions to stake out for U.S. foreign policy. Another problem in process is that Trump himself is too involved. Someone with as limited knowledge of the globe as he is shouldn't be involved in the micro decisions, but he is. Another problem is that Jared Kushner has too many important issues in his own portfolio, again, with very limited knowledge of the world around him. The voices that do emerge from this process are confused. Trump recently has sent out Mattis, Tillerson, and then Pence as a way of rolling out a foreign policy. So if you're a careful watcher of the news, you've seen that this is what happens in a particular region. So Asia, Mattis goes out, Tillerson goes out, and then Spence goes out. And then Nikki Haley mentions what the overall policy is going to be at the UN. And this has led to a bit of confusion because they're not all on the same page, not even remotely. Nikki Haley has just had to sign an agreement that every public statement she utters will now be cleared by the State Department. This is the first time in history that the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is going to have to operate under those conditions. And it's because she is openly contradicting what Mattis, Tillerson, and Pence say, and Mattis, Tillerson, and Pence contradict each other constantly. In fact, Tillerson often, in his own right, contradicts himself. Let me move now to policies. The hallmark, I think, of the first 100 days of Trump's foreign policies is contradiction. The Iran deal is terrible. Well, the Iran deal is pretty good. The U.S. has no dog in Middle East fights. The U.S. needs to land ground troops in Syria. Assad can stay. Assad has to go. China is a currency manipulator. China's currency policies help the United States. Nuclear proliferation is the biggest problem. Japan and South Korea should develop their own nuclear capabilities. NATO is obsolete. NATO is indispensable. The Export-Import Bank stinks. We love the bank. Jerusalem will be the new site of the U.S. Embassy in Israel within 24 hours of a Trump inauguration. Tel Aviv is a fine location for the U.S. Embassy. When you're the world's most powerful state, your deeds and actions have to match, or your resolve is going to constantly be tested. These contradictions undermine 60 years of liberal world order and the U.S. leadership of that order. Ambiguity is not a good thing in the international system. Your adversaries and your allies need consistency. There are several other key factors of Trump's foreign policy, I think, that should give us pause. First and most obvious, his unsettling personal style and impulsiveness are not welcomed by allies or adversaries. It's impossible to read Donald Trump. Trump does not understand that there are no wins in foreign policy, only problems that have to be managed successfully and that have, after all, imperfect solutions. States have vital national interests that are not for sale or that cannot be bundled into a deal. And this seems very clear to me as he tries to deal with the world. Recognizing failure in process and policy, Trump has decided that situational bold actions can replace both. The mother of all bombs and 59 Tomahawk missiles fired at Syria, both without any follow-up and clarifying statement of U.S. foreign policy. That placates Trump's base with headlines, but they do little else. These actions are not strategy. They're not even tactical in the sense that they have not changed the balance of forces or the political outlook of any of the belligerents at all. And I think that's the most pressing issue for people who want to focus on Trump's exercise of power. He seems fixated on these situational quick fixes, but they don't do anything else. There's no follow-on, there's no carry-through, there's no linkage between these actions and long-term U.S. foreign policy goals. Now, H.R. McMaster at the National Security Council is a very competent and professional soldier, and he is well-read and very smart, but his staff is depleted. And he is trying to get a hold of process. He's kicked the politicals from Trump's inner circle out of the NSC, but the first principals do not have their full complement of staff, and it's incredibly difficult to have policy issues rise to the NSC level and then to have full and frank discussions without full and frank policy review. It's literally ad hoc foreign policy, and that's dangerous. I want to close, and I've cut out a lot for brevity here, but I want to close with what I think is the greatest of all of Trump's foreign policy sins, and that is an absolute allergic reaction to hard work. Foreign policy is not easy. It's important. It's not a headline. It's not a tweet. And he just does not want to do the work. And he has surrounded himself, unfortunately, with people who are like-minded. I think these are going to have disastrous results. Thank you.